Mark Karlin of Buzzflash.com has some interesting thoughts on Trump destroying evidence. Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, subscribe to our channel, and share it with your friends, please. On the line with us is Mark Karlin, my old buddy, and has brought back to life Buzzflash.com, which has for well over a decade, maybe multiple decades, been a really consequential progressive website and source of news. Buzzflash.com, and his Twitter handle is @Buzzflash. Mark, welcome back to the program. It's been a while.
It's been an absolute pleasure to be back.
Thank you. You wrote an op-ed yesterday that people can find over at Buzzflash.com suggesting that there are clues hiding in plain sight. For example, the Justice Department refusing to say that they will preserve documents that Congress has asked them to preserve, that what we might be seeing here being played out is what Roger Stone famously advised Richard Nixon to do. Nixon decided to do what was legal and right and preserve the White House tapes. Roger Stone suggested that he should have burned them. And I think in retrospect, had he burned them, he may have survived that impeachment. You're suggesting that Donald Trump might be doing the same thing, basically burning the tapes?
Exactly. As a matter of fact, there was a Politico story in 2018 that, and this is, as many things Trumpian, almost unbelievable, but that Trump regularly tears up documents, correspondence, official memos, and this is in the Politico article. So it's not some sort of conspiracy theory, but there are actually 2 or 3 civil servants who are in the executive office building or are paid more than $60,000 a year to reassemble the documents that Trump tears up with Scotch tape.
Now, I read that like 2 years ago, and I'm wondering if Trump read that and if he's put an end to that. If either,
I don't think he's put an end to that. In fact, what I document in my commentary is there's something called the Presidential Records Act, and that requires that certain documents be maintained for storage in an ongoing presidential archive. This is particularly applicable to meetings with foreign leaders or phone calls. And in May of this year, 3 watchdog groups, this is before the infamous July 26th Zelensky call, filed suit against the Trump administration for not complying with the Presidential Records Act and indeed not even keeping a record of meetings and calls that he had with some foreign leaders, specifically several meetings and calls with Putin. And the case is winding its way through the courts, but last week the judge who's overseeing it, Amy Berman Jackson, in a federal district court in Washington, ordered the White House to preserve documents and to preserve records of those, of meetings with and phone calls with foreign leaders. I think these ethics groups are seeking an injunction that would have an enforceable mechanism because the judge says to Trump, you have to do this, you have to keep records. But as we know from the whistleblower, many of these records, if they are kept at all, of phone calls with foreign leaders that are meetings that are questionable, go into top secret server. One meeting that I'm sure you have made mention of on your program is a 2017 meeting that Trump had in the Oval Office with 2 very high-ranking Russian officials, in which, according to the Washington Post, a leaker told them that Trump told these Russian officials not to worry about their meddling in the 2016 election because even the U.S. meddles in other people's elections.
right.
We don't have a record, a transcript of that meeting, and that is required by the Presidential Records Act, and clearly Trump is not complying. This goes to the very essence of the whistleblower's point about the Zelensky call being kept on the full transcript being kept on a classified server. So the peril that Trump may indeed delete these records is extremely high.
So what, I mean, this goes back to, something that I was pointing out in the first hour of the program, and in fact, it was our paragraph for Facebook today on our show's Facebook page, which is basically the court of last resort here in a dispute between the legislative and between the legislative and executive branch. In other words, if Congress says we want these records, and Trump says you can't have them, or even says I've destroyed them, it goes to the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court rules, and God only knows what's going to happen there, because you got two Trump appointees and a 5-4 majority. But even if the court rules against Donald Trump, Trump's hero in terms of presidents is Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson's picture hangs right next to his desk, the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. Andrew Jackson was going to be taken off the $20 bill and replaced by Harriet Tubman, and Donald Trump and Stephen Mnuchin put a stop to that. And what happened when the Supreme Court, when Andrew Jackson was sued over the Trail of Tears over relocating Cherokees from Georgia to Oklahoma, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. And Andrew Jackson is said to have said, well, Chief Justice Marshall has made his decision. Let him enforce it. The Supreme Court has no enforcement mechanism outside of turning to the executive branch, to the president, and saying, please enforce the law. And if it's the president who's violating the law, what do we do, Mark?
Well, we are in jeopardy. I mean, this is what he's doing in terms of the letter that was sent to Congress yesterday. He's basically declaring war on the Constitution,
yes.
The constitutional role of Congress to launch an impeachment inquiry and to proceed with impeachment if it's warranted.
And provide oversight.
And so he's saying he is above the law. And Nixon said that, but he ultimately complied once I think it was a guy named Alexander Butterfield, if I recall.
Yes.
He, in congressional testimony, made a stunning remark that there was a tape system in the White House, and it was that which led to, as you mentioned, Nixon turning over the tapes. There was an infamous 18-and-a-half-minute gap in one of the key tapes. And I think that's what we're seeing with Trump. He's still referring to the Zelensky phone call. He said a few days back that it was a verbatim transcript down to every comma.
Right.
And we know from the whistleblower that that's not true, but it throws the press off in several CNN articles, and even in the Washington Post, I've still seen it referred to as a transcript.
Right. When it first came out, I pointed out on this program that there were 3 places where there were ellipses, ... which means something has been deleted, and that if you read the transcript out loud or the summary out loud, it comes to 11 minutes, but according to the timestamp, it was a 30-minute conversation. Obviously, there's a bunch of stuff that's been deleted from that. It's just, I guess this gets back to this question of, what do we do? How do we do this? And it seems to me that Congress needs to move, really rapidly to impeach this guy, and because I don't think he's going to be held to account by any other mechanism. Do you know of any, Mark?
I think that Trump has established that he is hunkering down in the White House and that will take a dumpster truck to remove him. The only enforcement mechanism is Congress. I think these watchdog groups have been seeking since May to basically have an injunction issued by the judge that would appoint an overseer outside the White House to make sure that they're complying with the Presidential Records Act, and that Trump would, and he still hasn't accounted for these meetings with Putin.